Um, so one of the things I always found very appealing about practice from the Anapanasati Sutta is that it's like such a unified practice. It's not like right now you do, calm abiding, tranquility, concentration. I know you hate that word, shamatha practice, and then now you do Vipassana practice. It's kind of like very integrated. That's my understanding. And that there are perhaps moments when one is more emphasized than the other, but the potential for both is kind of there throughout, and it's deliberately cultivated together. But I suppose maybe the last couple of months, I have emphasized the tranquility and the shamatha kind of aspect of it. And I think I realized, sort of reflecting on my practice in the last few months, I've been so involved in the second tetrad. I've been, especially the first two steps, the joy and the happiness, and just like I feel like the last few months has actually kind of like quite deeply reconditioned me in a way, because the last couple of months I've spent, an hour a day flooding myself with this joy and tranquility, and it's been pretty good. But then, and then we've spoken a few times about, right, what do you do with that from there? And you said, and you said it a few times, and I've tried to take it on, and it hasn't quite happened. But then I think very recently, I think I'm starting to understand what you mean a little bit more. You said, talking about what you attend to. So you kind of, perhaps you allow the intensity of the jhana, of the joy and the happiness, perhaps it subsides a little bit. It's not quite so intense. You leave it there in the background, and then you kind of wisely attend to what is going to bring you out of that state of satisfaction, or what will enable you to stay in it. And sometimes that made sense in my practice, in the moment, in sitting, and sometimes it didn't make sense. And then the last few days, I've been looking at the sutta itself, and I read looking at the sutta itself, and steps 7 and 8, they never really made sense to me, because they seem to be speaking about the mind, mental formations, whereas it's supposed to be that tetrad is all about the feelings. But then suddenly,
that's a problem with that word sita. Is that the sita does not it translated into English as mind,
but it can easily mean heart.
Well, it actually does, and in the Thai they use the word jai. Yeah. I've actually checked this out. All right. Because that's one of the places where they miss it. Why would then they put Sita Nupassana as part of the Vedana Nupassana?
Yeah.
The answer is because the word Sita has more than one definition. And that the definition that we should generally look at is, there's another word for the kind of mind that we would want to think of as mind when we're using it purely as English.
Mana.
But in the mana, exactly. Yeah. Manut, which actually gives us man and humanity. That's what it's pointing at, is that becoming human means that we're no longer living in feelings as the primary driver. That now our primary driver is wisdom. And so basically the Anapanasati Sutta then that you're talking about, step 7 and 8, is the word that's put into the English is conditioner, to where in fact what we're talking about is that old bunch of stuff that is our past feelings, as opposed to the new feelings that we can have, to release us from those old sankharas, to have the kind of feelings that we want to. But let's back up just a bit, back up to that whole Anapanasati Sutta, because
Mm.
there's an important point in there. And that is that as he starts, actually, first off, the sutta introduces the situation, and then the Buddha introduces Anapanasati.
Mm-hmm.
After the first thing that he introduces with Anapanasati is this, that it is of great fruit, it is of great value. And he has already talked about who is here, including the Jhana dudes and the meta dudes and this and that. And he says, and we're talking now about Anapanasati as if to try to gain the audience attention to start to practice a new way.
Mm.
And that is that it's of great fruit and great value. And then he says that we practice Anapanasati for the fulfillment of the four foundations of mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
What he means by that is we're practicing Anapanasati to get insight into or get in touch with or come to understand the body, the feelings, the mind, and the mind's objects. Therefore, Anapanasati is broken out into that.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says that we're practicing Anapanasati for the fulfillment of the four foundations of mindfulness, and we practice the four foundations of mindfulness. And if you think about it deeply, this is the second noble truth. The four foundations of mindfulness is actually the discovery of the source of suffering, which
Mm.
means that it immediately goes into the five aggregates, and from there it goes into the full teachings of Anapanasati. So now we collect that together and we begin to see, okay, we got a whole package deal when we're talking about the four foundations of mindfulness.
Mm.
And so we're using Anapanasati for the fulfillment of the four foundations of mindfulness, which means we really do figure out the mind because we've got a really excellent map called the Paticca Samuppada or the Paticca Samuppada, which is actually basically a story of how the mind works,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can see how the mind winds up in suffering and you can decide at what point you're going to change that course or direction so the mind doesn't wind out in suffering.
Mm.
And Bhikkhu Buddhadasa makes a big point of it, and I didn't know where the sutta was until finally I found it in the suttas in Dingha Nikaya number 15, where it's the feelings is that point. So that if we have wisdom at Pasa, at that point of contact, then we can decide what feeling we're going to have. But we actually practice that in Anapanasati is that we begin to experience how we can transform the feelings, not just any old time we want to it, but in fact practice it so that we can
Mm.
get it down so that we know how to do it.
Mm.
Okay, so the next part of the sutta then is that we practice the four foundations of mindfulness, including all of these things. We do that for the fulfillment of the Sambojana. Now, here the Sambojana is stated differently because in the Satipatthana Sutta, this is the place where the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path are talked about. But in the Anapanasati Sutta, instead, he talks about the seven factors of enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
That looks like a contradiction until you understand. No, the Eightfold Noble Path is the path to the Sambojana when you get a new word introduced. And that new word is, and the best that we have in English language is unremitting
Mm.
or repeating. In other words, it keeps coming back and keeps coming back and keeps coming back. That's what that we're looking for. And that the first factor of the Bojana is unremitting mindfulness. That's it. That's one of the reasons why I keep harping on it, though I don't talk
Mm.
about that particular point. But that's the first factor of enlightenment. is when we have unremitting mindfulness. Well, guess what? Mindfulness or sati is one of the aspects of the path. That's it. And now we have to get it towards unremitting. Keep coming back. This is the practice, not getting it and then getting a jhana and then getting a deeper jhana and then getting another jhana and then another jhana after that. And some of them have a list that goes way up there into the high numbers. All right. But this is, in fact, what we're looking for instead is this unremitting mindfulness. And that gives us then the possibility of unremitting investigation. In other words, keep looking. Well, that factor fits precisely into the path as, in fact, right view. The right view is to keep looking. If you actually read the definition of right view, it's got investigation factor on the path. But when it's an enlightenment factor, it's unremitting. Now we're seeing how this stuff fits together. The next item on the Eightfold Noble Path there is right effort. But the third item on the 7 factors of enlightenment, the Sambhojana, is unremitting energy. Now our effort becomes effortless, and that we've actually become eager to do it, as opposed to reluctant but need a little push. It's almost now we've got to the point that the car, we've got it pushed off, but now it's rolling down the hill. There it goes. It's got its own energy now. Okay, so now that we're seeing that that's there, then the next one is talked about unremitting piti, and the actual Pali word is piti, to get oneself into that state of joy. That's an enlightenment factor, is to get really happy, really satisfied, really relaxed. And in fact, the word relaxed would then come next. That's the 5th factor that is often translated, mindlessly translated, as tranquility. But a much better word would be peace. But the easy way to look at it is just relax, which is also cool off. And so you see then that the 7 factors of enlightenment is the fulfillment of the Eightfold Noble Path.
So what's the Pali word then for that last factor?
I'll have to go look it up.
Okay.
I'll send it to you later.
Okay.
I know exactly where to find it, but I don't remember it right off.
So really then the 7 factors of awakening are sort of a recapitulation of the Eightfold Path.
Eightfold Noble Path in its actual fulfillment.
Because I find it's very interesting, isn't it? Within the Buddha's teaching, there's like so many capitulations of things. You know, it's astonishing, really. You just, for me, it kind of reflects. It probably reflects the fact that he was teaching for 45 years, and he was teaching different people, and it probably reflects his skill as a teacher. That when teaching this group of people at this time, he found this way of formulating the teachings. And when teaching this group of people at this time, he found this way of formulating the teachings.
Actually, I would say that over the 45 years that he evolved also. An example of that is that there are things in the Paticcasamuppada that is kind of a list or a breaking down of stuff that's in the really early suttas, like the Sutta Nipata, but it neither mentions the word Paticcasamuppada nor does it give the complete list.
So suggesting that was a kind of refinement or development that occurred later in his teaching life.
Right.
Yeah.
So where we do know that the Anapanasati Sutta was really late.
Which suggests that it was highly refined.
Exactly so. And pointing in specific directions. But wait, there's more. There's another set of knives in this drawer. And that's in fact the reason that I started that. And that is that we practice the 7 factors of enlightenment for the fulfillment of something else. And that is knowledge and freedom, or moksha, ditthi, and moksha, freedom. That is also, Bhikkhu Bodhi translates it as deliverance. But that deliverance would be the way that one would be delivered in a raft going down a river. But the word deliverance is not really the same that we're looking for, but it is that dual combination of knowledge and deliverance, or knowledge and freedom, or knowledge and relaxation or release, is also at the end of the Great 40. And in fact, the Eightfold Noble Path is that which is discussed. And at the end of the sutta, knowledge and deliverance are added as factors of the path. Because they also happen along the way.
So is knowledge and deliverance sort of synonymous with awakening, with the freedom that comes from...
Actually, it's synonymous with Vipassana and Samatha.
I see.
That's where I'm coming to.
I see,
with this.
Okay.
That they will...
Okay, so knowledge is Vipassana, and the cooling, the relaxation, the freedom is Shamatha.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly. And they come like that. Knowledge comes first. A clear example of that is that if Moses knew the way to Jerusalem, if he knew the way to the Promised Land, it would have been lickety-split, 18 days at best. 40 years they wandered in the wilderness, okay? So this is what happens with those who are seeking samatha without knowledge. This is why the jhanas by themselves are so difficult to do, is because the guys don't know what they're doing. But if you really got Paticca Samuppada really wired down and you understand the path, you can actually see that that's also not just a path to the end of suffering. It's also the path to practice the jhanas, so that you actually know what you're doing when you get there. You know how to get it, you know how to get into it, you know how to get to the next step, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's all there is to it when you really know what you're doing. And so those who are striving for and loving and want jhana are probably going to get it a much more difficult time many years later than the guys who are doing the direct method of reading a map before you take a hike. Makes perfect sense to me. That's why the Buddha had the Paticca Samuppada. If the jhana dudes won the score and they're the ones who win that war, then what's the point of learning about Paticca Samuppada? What's the point of the insight? That in fact that was what they were doing before the time of the Buddha, and that's what the Buddha was doing. He could do all of the jhanas. He was so magnificent at it that the schools that he went to wanted him to take over. And you can see that it's a dead-end street. At best, someone who can get into those states could just stay there, like Bodhidharma did for 9 years, or other cave dwellers. They just sit and do nothing. And in fact, I saw a temple in Burma that had 4 or 5 of those guys. One of them was known to not ever get up except to go for Bendabat, go for breakfast, and he would also go for the toilet a couple of times. But he was able to sit up all night. He could sleep. He could do everything. He just sat there. all the time.
Mm.
Well, while there's one way of saying, well, that's impressive, on another frame is that, hey, I don't want to live my life like that. I'm not really impressed at all. I'm impressed that he can do it, but I'm not impressed that he wants to. And so that's the best that you can hope for with these jhana dudes, is that they get to the point of no place to go and nothing to do the hard way. There's another way of doing it, which is more symbolic of no place to go and nothing to do, but we can still take care of whatever little business there is to do, and we can live happily.
But yeah, it's interesting because you've previously said about how important the first jhana is in the path, and there's like the famous sutta and story of the Buddha coming out of his ascetic semi-starvation and going, that time under the crabapple tree, I was onto something then.
Rose apple.
Oh yeah. Crab apple, something you'd find in England. So on the one hand, I'm hearing the jhanas are temporary states, and therefore are never going to provide the insight from which true freedom, true release, true knowledge, awakening arises. And yet, I've heard you say many times about how important it is that we are able to get ourselves into that state of satisfaction and stay there. So
yes, but that the first jhana is where both the mind, the citta, are the let us break it down the way that the Buddha does, and that is verbal. There is the verbal part of the mind, and then there is the emotional part of the mind. We need both of them functioning in order to get insight. To where the jhanas is specifically learning how to turn them off and keeping them off.
Even the emotional part of the mind, because the first three, I mean, certainly piti and sukha as being the things in which you are absorbed, those are inherently emotional objects to be absorbed in, aren't they? So how could you be in first or second jhana without the emotional part of your mind active?
Well, you're asking the question kind of upside down. Because let us say that when you go into jhana by being able to modify or start to work with those things. But the other quality of the first jhana is the applied and directed thought. And the word applied here, and this was something that I didn't understand for a long time, but I had an old monk straighten me out about it. And that is that what we're going to apply the mind to is things that are wholesome, things that are worthy of one's attention, in the sense of the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Noble Path, the 7 factors of enlightenment. We're going to start thinking about this stuff, but we're not going to be thinking about it solely in the form of it being conceptual. Now we're bringing it to the point of experiential, so that instead of reciting dukkha, we actually see it. We begin to see that the junk mind is just suffering.
Is this then step 7? Like this you're in jhana, you're in the place of piti and sukha, you're absorbed in it, but you have enough thinking space free to observe the mental formations that cause suffering, that bring you out of suffering.
I would say yes, with the caveat of only if you're also doing proper breathing. That mindfulness of breathing is right there at every step. And in fact, if you reread the Anapanasati Sutta, you will see that the step 5 is going to be introduced is the development of piti, or the development of really good feelings, while watching the in-breath and while watching the out-breath.
Yeah.
And
breathing in, one experiences. Breathing in, one trains. Breathing out, one trains. Yeah.
Trains. Yes, exactly. You got it. Okay. And yet when you described it to me, you left that part out. And so I wanted to put that back in. You will not have applied and sustained thought if you don't have a mind that's really fit for work, that's really well oxygenated. That's the whole point of keeping us from being drowsy or restless or having a mind full of doubt or wandering around or any of that kind of stuff. We can now apply it. And what we're going to apply it to, ta-da, what's happening right now. And we're going to apply it in the sense of this is suffering, this is not suffering, this is the cause of suffering, this is the path that I got to myself here so that I can see the suffering. So we begin to review the stages of the Eightfold Noble Path. That this is investigation. Am I, in fact, investigating? These are the kinds of thoughts. Yes, I am. Am I really looking at feelings? Yep, doing it. There they are. Wow, what is that fool? What? Wait a minute. No, they're not. I like it. Okay. So,
okay. So step 7 then, I'm just trying to relate it back to the sutra as well. So step 7 then is from this place of kind of satisfaction and happiness, breathing in, breathing out, keeping our mindfulness on that, and this awareness of the feelings. We've deliberately cultivated good feelings, and now from that place we watch the kind of mental sankharas come that would pull us away, but because of sati, they're not pulling us away. We're just watching them.
Precisely so.
And they go.
Don't do your hand this way because that's too much of thought. Do it this way because now we're talking about feelings. All right, just to make that in there, because we want to actually do both of those things.
But it's the feelings. It's like the feelings is the component. Because the mental formations. It's like we're presumably what we're investigating, what we're watching, are those snippets of memory, thought, those sort of mental formations, but we're watching them for their emotional power to bring us out of our state of satisfaction, and we're using right sati to not allow that to occur.
You got it. Yes, exactly.
And then so after the analogy, sorry, go on. The analogy.
Well, the analogy then here we could use is, now that we understand that this mind system is like a boiling cauldron, let's start taking a look at it.
Hence why deeper jhana is not going to be ideal, because actually for these sort of mental and emotional sankharas to emerge, for us to be able to develop some insight around them, we can't be so deep in an absorption that they're not there.
Exactly so.
Okay.
And also the second jhana then breaks out that ability to apply and direct the thought. That basically what it is that even though it's referred to and thought of as a thoughtless state, the important point is that when the because second jhana, if it's actually second jhana doing it properly, we already have the sukha and the piti. It's there. We really do feel it. So that when the mind begins to stop, or when it stops, now we're not talking about it. We're just in full-blown experience of the feelings of joy. And so the Buddha gives an analogy. And And by the way, there's an analogy that I've hardly ever referenced that I'll give you now for the first jhana. The analogy is, imagine that a bathsman had bath powder. Or another way that I like to talk about it, because I watched my granny make biscuits, that she would put out a bunch of flour out on it, and then she'd take her fingers, dip it in the bowl, and sprinkle the water on the flour so that she would get just enough water on it to make it into a dough that did not seep. But it's that joy is the water that we keep dripping and dripping and dripping as we remember onto the dry mind, that it gets it in kind of a doughy state. It's not liquid, but it's not powder. It's kind of doughy, and so it's kneaded all over the place to get all of the powdery places out so that it's all one solid ball. But you can squeeze it really tightly and it's not going to drip at all.
So it's completely suffused is the idea that it's...
Yeah. Right, suffused with joy.
Mm.
So that your whole being is suffused with joy. But you watched it happen, you noticed it happening, you were witnessing to it happening, and you were manufacturing it in order to happen, and you were talking yourself into it.
See, for me, the way I experience that is sort of in a sit, is that when working with the body, like working with just mindfulness of breathing, and then bringing that mindfulness of breathing into the body and kind of breathing up the body and down the body and just kind of deeply, and then like the whole body, and just sort of sitting and feeling the whole body kind of expand and contract, it just starts to feel deeply pleasurable. And then at a certain point, there'll be like a kind of big exhalation and a kind of letting go of any resistance to that pleasure. And then that pleasure will normally then immediately come on the face, and an enormous grin, like a very, like, I would imagine if I saw my face doing it, I'd be quite, it's like very intense grin. And then I tap into that feeling, and it just floods to the point that like there's a really specific sensation I get in my brain. It feels like at the top of my head, and it feels like all of a sudden it's just going and it's very like, it's the rapture side of it. It feels like very, very, very intense, comes in waves. I keep my attention there and with the breath, and I use the breath as a way of kind of guiding the PT, and then I kind of expand it through the body. But then at a certain point, I feel, and this is maybe where I'm perhaps a bit confused between first jhana and second jhana. My understanding was that first jhana is like PT foregrounded, sukha backgrounded, and that second jhana is like a reversal of that, and it's sukha in the background and the PT kind of chills a bit. So for me, the way I experience that,
think of it like that.
So the way I experience that is there's like that, as I said, that very intense, like rapturous, there's a strong physical component to it. And then at a certain point, it's like that's released, and it's like another letting go process. And it becomes a subtler thing, and it becomes more like the emotional state of happiness rather than the physical state of rapture that become the kind of most obvious element of experience at that moment. And from my understanding is that is going from the fifth step to the sixth step, and also from the first jhana to the second jhana. But there's not that
maybe
much...
Maybe not so. No, that I would say is still the development of the first jhana.
I see, okay.
Okay, and we'll talk about the second jhana also. But one of the things that I would like to add to you, in fact, you just mentioned it, but in passing, and that is that when the rapture suffuses, when it really gets going, it also has a number of physical components that are easily to recognize. One would be the hair standing up on the end. Another one is the you you begin to tingle all over, because one reason is you're getting enough oxygen. You need this oxygen in order to get the body into that kind of a state. Now, the hair on the back will stand up, but it'll also feel chilled. Let us imagine it's already gotten cold and where you are. Go outside for just a couple of minutes with as little clothing on as you dare. And just stand there barefoot in the snow or on the ground and let yourself get cold. With the thought, I like this, I can handle this. This is actually a physical way of bringing on piti. And then you stand.
Do you know, I love cold water bathing. There's nothing I would prefer to do on a like February morning than jump in a river in North Wales. It's like my favorite thing to do is to swim in lakes and rivers in Britain, freshly melted mountain ice. Bring it on. I love it.
All right. Well, I would say that your love of that and the feelings that you get with that are very close to. I mean, that's what the word nibbana really means. It really does physically mean chilling out. And we're talking about it, doing it big time. In fact, the Tibetans do it because they've got the cold weather, and that I've heard, though I know that it's done on other occasions, but I've heard that it's part of the ceremony of the graduation of a long, long, deep retreat. Some of them lasting 3 years. So after the guys do a 3-year retreat, then what they do is they take their robe and get it thoroughly wet and down and then put it back on. And now the idea is, how much steam can I make? Putting that cold, freezing cold robe back on and just sitting there and not just chilling with it, but warming it up with the thought of, I can handle this. This is really cold and I like it, but I can do it. I can handle this. So there's a quality of cold weather, cold water that does have this feeling of really chilling off, because mostly we're in a state of dukkha, which is associated with heat. And so chilling the body off actually is a very good thing to do. And that when you're doing it mentally with the first jhana, that's exactly what we're doing. We're chilling out. And the body starts to experience those things so that we begin to feel cold chills. Or maybe they're not cold chills. What they are is shivers. But they're shivers of delight. But shivers of delight and shivers of cold are so close together. Okay.
Yeah, I feel that when I get it in the solar plexus, like this kind of wobble, like shivering feeling, and then it kind of comes up, and it's always, and then it's very here. I tend to find it's So then
also watch for it on the neck. Eventually, this is what in the Hindu system they call the Kundalini rising.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, because it just comes right up the back. It
I find a way.
When I think about it, it starts to happen. Forgive me, I'm having a little about a break.
One thing that I do often when I'm in it, and it's at the point, but it's like quite focused in like one or two areas, and I'm trying to suffuse the body with it, is I imagine breathing up the spine, and then from the spine completely releasing the joy into like every cell in my body. And it physically, it feels like that's happening. Like there's a kind of upward movement and then a diffusion out into the body. And it feels, and it can be deeply satisfying to repeat that kind of breathing cycle, like up the spine, out through the body, up the spine, out through the body.
Well, that's what we're looking for, is that satisfaction.
Yeah.
It's completely, you said it, I caught you at it.
So to go back to the sort of original question, sorry, I'm going to do that really annoying thing again where I ask you how many minutes to the hour we are, because at 8 o'clock I've got to make a move to school.
We're 40 minutes in.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, great. Will you tell me,
Okay.
because I can't on my phone, it doesn't have the time when I'm on a call. Will you tell me when we're like at 5 to the hour? Is that okay?
5 to the hour. It's 2:47. No, it's 2:57. It's 5 to the hour.
Oh dear. Okay. Well, we will keep going for another 5 or 10 minutes, because to go back from that, because that all of that satisfaction, all of that, I feel like, to go back to what I was saying at the beginning, my practice the last month or two has been where it's at. It's kind of getting into that satisfaction loop, being there, staying with it, sitting it, letting it flood. And as I said, I found it incredibly valuable. And I feel like there's actually quite a deep retraining that happens when you get yourself into that state, stay in that state, and do it day after day.
Okay.
So then the question is, where now? And I think we've kind of spoken about it. It is that step 7 and 8. It's kind of just correct me if my understanding is off. It's kind of allowing, or the PT and the Sukha at a certain point, they do perhaps lose their intensity a bit, and we can allow that to happen. We don't have to force them to stay there
you
at
get
the same
used
level.
to it. It's not new anymore.
Yes,
it's like a book. You keep reading that same book, it's going to get old.
Yeah.
Physically.
So then what you can do is you can allow the PT and the Sukha to kind of join the breath and join the body awareness just in the peripheral awareness, and then you can bring your attention to the kind of the sankharas, the mental formations and the emotional components that they have. And with right sati, you can watch them and you can see them for what they are. Is this something that has the potential to bring you out of joy? Is this something which has the,
Actually, it would if you weren't watching.
It would if you didn't have the sati to watch rather than get involved with. Yes. And you watch that and you watch that and you watch that. And then step 8 is the calming.
And sometimes some things will come up, like you'll begin to feel anxiety, or you'll begin to feel anger, or you'll begin to feel, and here's one that's very often happens, is resentment for having to work so hard at doing this. And then you go back out in the day, and then you're going to have a flat tire, and then you feel bad. I was at Sukha all day today, and now I've got a flat tire, and I helped myself, and why did I do bothering the meditation anyway? So this is the kind of thing that can happen.
Or sloth. So, for me, it's often in leaving the absorption, leaving that kind of intensity. I can then, and with the intention of then letting that be in the background and watching the mind, watching the sankharas, I sometimes get slothful and dull, and then I kind of bring myself back to the breathing, to the deeper breathing, and
you're seeing the relationship between the two. Yes.
And
the
also
dullness happens when we're not breathing.
Yes, and also allow the breathing to be suffused with the joy and the rapture again. That brings my energy levels right up, and then I kind of return to that watching. And for me, that's like a very powerful message, because it's kind of like you don't have to succumb to that hindrance of sloth.
I used to use the phrase breathing in joy.
Yeah.
Breathing out, relax, relax. Breathing in joy and breathe out, relax, relax. That will help bring on that attitude of I can do this in the winter.
Yeah.
But there's one more point that I'd like to interrupt with to go on just for completion point, because I started by giving you the analogy of the dough and the fingertips of the first jhana, because there's an analogy for the second jhana, which may help you understand why we don't really want to go there. We really want to stay in this state so that we can see the junk and start to deal with it. And that is, the analogy is that it's like a wellspring or a spring, and it's also known by the name of an artesian well. Now, some springs just bubble up a little bit, but we're talking about one that's a real gusher.
Mm-hmm.
And it only happens certain times of the year, and it's often on the side of a hill or at least above high ground, which is the source of the water, but it springs up then underground, and it comes up kind of ferociously. Well, what farmers historically have always done is build a dam around it, because it's on the side of a hill, it's easy enough to do anyway. And so I was with one of these things, and the Buddha talks about it, that the pond then that is formed has a surface water that's warm and kind of still, just like a regular pond. But if you dive down to that wellspring, it will bubble and it will churn and it will move all around, and it's also cold.
Mm.
And we used to enjoy that. I mean, that was just one of the delights of summer, was to go swimming in that artesian lake or that artesian pond that was there. And so when I saw that in the jhana, or in the description of the second jhana, I said, I know what that is. And also the quality has to do with, that's what happens with the rapture when we are really paying close attention to how good the body feels. Then it is like being in that pool of cold water when it's just gushing all over the place. And in fact, this is actually described as various levels of piti, but they're talking about it not as a mental state, but as in fact what actually does happen to the body. It's a real gusher. Okay, so then the third jhana is nothing but letting that rapture and piti be there. But now, like a lotus flower, we rise out of it and we're not wet at all. We recognize that flood of emotions are no longer going to be affecting me, because I've risen above it. And so that's the definition of the third jhana, and that's the analogy that's used. And that's really interesting. So we get ourselves suffused with joy. And then when we start paying really close attention to it, it goes gaga. And then while it's going gaga, we can say, never mind, I can come right out of that. I can actually put that stuff to sleep. Because I've already put to sleep the conscious mind in the sense of the verbal descriptions and thinking. And so now we're going to put to rest all of these feelings.
Well, is that step 8 then? The calming of the mental activities? No.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. The calming of the mental activities then would be one of the higher jhanas, but it also is done in the first jhana, in the sense of just watching that stuff with because you see, in the first jhana, you will still have negative feelings, emotions, what we would associate with the woeful states. Being reborn in an animal, like starting to resent that I have to do so much work with my meditation. Or we can fall into anger states or anxiety states. These will happen throughout the day, even if you can do that. And so the question is, hey, can I get myself into a state of satisfaction so that I can watch my mind bring up? So we have to kind of look at the fact that this practice that we're working with, first jhana, is designed to be there so that we can use it all day long throughout our day. To where the second jhana is actually, we need seclusion, we need quiet, we need to be away from it all, we need to be completely thoughtless, we need to be in an artificially safe place. But in the first jhana, we can actually manufacture the safe place with wisdom to see what we're going to do.
Through the training provided in the Anapanasati practice.
Right, exactly. Wisdom.
Okay.
because that's the factor of the Jhana, is unremitting investigation, so that we're able to see the dukkha as it's coming and then step out of the way. So, in a way, the Buddha's real new method, the method of the first jhana, is really liberating, to where the jhana dude, no matter how deep he goes into jhana, he is still bound to that jhana and bound to the location that he's doing that jhana. To where first jhana gives you all of the freedom of location, freedom of thought, freedom of feeling, freedom of seeing what's going on. So you're free from doubt. To where the jhana dude winds up being incapable of being out in the world. But see, in the lifestyle that I have is that I'm capable of being out of the world, but I'm not in the state of stupefying jhana. I recognize through wisdom, there's no reason to go to town, let's not go. Okay, so I think that we've about reached our time. We've been 51 minutes, and it's 3:08 p.m. here.
Okay, great.
This has been a really great talk. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Me too, yeah. I will speak to you very soon. I'm interested. Yeah, I'm interested. I feel like I've now got a much fuller understanding of that second half of the second tetrad. And for the sake of kind of having a holistic overview, next time perhaps we can just keep going onto the third tetrad. Does that sound good and sensible?
Oh, sure. Right.
Okay.
You bring it up, we'll talk about it.
Okay. Dhammarato, as ever, thank you very much.
We'll see you later, Matt.
Okay. Be well. Take care.